Okay, we're up to the Mishnah of Ayin Daled Amud Bey, is the second Mishnah. The Mishnah is telling us about the three applications of oil that the majority of Menachos have. The overwhelming majority of Menachos have three applications. The first, you place the oil in Nesinas Akli, you put it in the oil in the base. Then you put the flour in, make it into a dough. Then you add oil to knead it into the dough, meaning you add oil to the base, make it into a dough, that oil and knead it into the dough. And then there's oil just poured on top at the very end. Majority of menachos have those three applications. It says the Mishnah, Kol ha-menachos hanasas b'kli. Kol menachos hanasas b'kli. All menachos that are made in a kli. This is to exclude what's called minchas mafa. Minchas mafa means it's baked. There's one mincha that's not mekudesh in a kli. It's just baked. Called minchas mafa, but outside of that, all other menachos, tu'unay shloishim matana shemen, they require three applications of oil. Yitzika, pouring on top, that's the very last one. For some reason, the Mishnah goes last to first. Yitzika, belilo, which is part of the mixing, you mix it into the dough, and then matan shemen b'kli, and the first application is merely placing it into the vessel before the dry ingredients. Koyd masiyasa. Now, the Mishnah describes when do you mix the oil on. A lot of the menachos, again, most of the menachos, you would actually bake it. Then you would break it apart and do the kmitza after it was broken apart. We're used to the kmitza being on flour. That was by the sinner's mincha. The overwhelming majority of minchas, you would actually bake it into a loaf and then break it apart and do the kmitza on the broken pieces of the bread. So the question is, when do you do the second application of oil? Again, you put the oil on the base before the dry ingredients. The last oil is at the very end. There's no shaila. The second is, when do you place that second oil and mix it in? Is it when it's a dough and it's raw, or is it after it's already fried or after it's already baked? It could be that after it's already fried and baked, and as you're breaking apart, then you add the oil again and mix it. So says the Mishnah, chalos, regarding chalos, boilulon, divrei Rabbi. Rabbi says, after you make it into loaves, then you break it apart and add the second oil. So the second oil on the baked chalas, on the ones chalas that are baked or fried, you break it apart, you add oil when it's at that stage, not when it's raw, when it's already baked. That's Rebbe's opinion. Chum say, no, silas, no, you add it when it's still a raw flour, when it's still dough. Okay. It does have a nice diagram. It helps a little bit. Now, we're going to talk about the last step. Again, the baked chalas do not require the last thing, the last yitzika. They just only have two. Hachalas tunas belila, or a kikin mashicha. Okay, basically, minchas mafa, which is this baked mincha, which is a donation. It's an optional baked mincha. It could either be wafers, it could either be chalas or a kikin. It could either be loaves or wafers. Okay, those are the two options. You have a choice. You bring 10, it comes in a group of 10. You bring chalas, you bring rakikin. If it's chalas, then boilin. Then you mix the oil in. The second step is done, it's mixed in. But if it's rakikin, which means that if it's made of rakikin, which are not like wafers, whatever, you don't mix the oil in, you actually smear it on top.
Those are wafers.
Correct, but that you smear it on top. That's the second stage. Again, these baked challahs don't have the third stage, as we'll see in a moment. They don't have the third stage. All they have is the first two. So you place the oil when it's raw ingredients, that's a kuli alma. The second one, the question is it mixed in or merely smeared on top? If it's chalas, it's mixed in like all other minchas. If it's rakikin, it's just smeared on top. Kates on moishkin, what does the smearing look like? Kamin ki. You do it like the shape of a key, which is the Greek letter key, Greek Yavanis, however that looked. Some opinions say it looked like a sort of half moon, whatever it looked like. You do that. Now, if you have a lot of oil and you just smear it once like that, you're going to have excess oil. So it says the Mishnah, and the remainder is eaten by the kehanim. Again, this is dafka by the baked mincha, which does not have a third stage. It does not have the pouring of the oil on top of the yitzika. All it has is the second stage. So if it's a chalas, you mix it in like any other mincha, and if it's rakikin, you just do quick smear, and the remaining oil is given to the kehanim to eat. Okay, now the Gemara is gonna start drushes for basically everything that we talked about. It says the Gemara, when the Mishnah said that all menachos that are baked in a kli, that all menachos that are hanasis bekli, that are made in a kli shares, require 3 applications. So what's the one type of mincha that does not require 3 applications? Says the Gemara, Amra Papa lemute minchas mafa. Minchas mafa, which is an optional mincha that you could bring that's baked. Again, it could come in the form of chalas or a kikin. They do not have the 3rd type of oil application. There is no just pouring on top at the very end. That doesn't exist. Just the first 2. Tan Rabbanon, v'im minchas marcheshes karbanecha soilis b'shemen taseh. The pasuk says that if it's a minchas marcheshes, then you bring oil and flour. Milamid shetunen matan shemen b'kli. Basically, the Gemara is going to have a source for all the applications of oil. This is the first application of oil, that you put the oil in the base of the vessel before you put the dry ingredients. Milamid shetuna matan shemen b'kli, because the pasuk says soilis b'shemen, which means that the flour is placed on the oil, which means there's an oil base in the kli shares before you put the dry ingredients. That's by the marcheshes. Karbanecha l'gzeir shava. The extra word karbanecha is to tell you makan matan shemen b'kli, avlalon matan shemen b'kli. Just like the bar marcheshes, you put the oil first application. So too by the machvas. The machvas are the marcheshes. One's a deep pan, one's a short pan, and the source for the application of oil, the first application, is by the marcheshes. The source of the 3rd application is by the machvas, and the word karbanecha tells you that they have the same halachas. Malalani etzika belila, afkani etzika belila. Just like by the machvas, it has the other 2 applications, so to the marcheshes. So the marcheshes has the source for the first application, the machvas has the source for 2 and 3. Gzeir Shava says you put it together, they all have 1, 2, 3. Chalus, now regarding the chalus, I told you in the Mishnah, it's a machloikas, Rabbi and the Chachamim. When do you do the second application? Do you do it when it's raw ingredients, a raw dough? That's when you mix in the oil? Or no, maybe you bake it first, or fry it first, break it apart, then add the second oil. Again, there's the first oil which is done in the base of the vessel. That's the kuliyama. The 3rd oil is just poured on top when it's all done. The question is, when do you do the second oil? So when do you do the second oil? So the Gemara says, the machlokes Rabbi and the Chachamim. So the machlokes Rabbi and the Chachamim, that according to Rabbi, you do it when it's already baked, and according to Chachamim, you do it when it's raw ingredient. It says the Gemara Tan Rabbanon, soiles belula. The pasuk says soiles, which is flour. Belula, that's when you mix it in. Milamed shenichlalas soiles. That's the source, that you mix it in when it's raw, not when it's already baked. That's the sheet of the Chachamim. Rabbi says, no. Chalas bailulan. The pasuk basically says flour, and then it says baked, and then it says mix it in. So the Rabbanan say, flour mixed in. Rabbi says, no, but it also says baked mixed in, which means you bake it, you mix it in after it's already baked. Shenemar chalas bailas. Amruloi, the Rabbanan said, haloi lachmei toida nemer ben chalas, v'yeshel bailon keshen chalas elasoiles. The Rabbanan say, I'll prove to you you're wrong. Why? Because the lachmei toida, the 40 loaves of the carbon toida, also you have to do oil, and that can't be baked. That can't be pre-baked when you mix in the oil. So kamash malan, every single time you mix it in must be raw. In other words, the Rabbanan's proof that it can't be mixed in when it's baked is from the lachmei toida. Now they don't give a source for this. They just say it's a svara. It can't be done. I'll explain right now. I'll say it over. The Gemara is going to say the lachmei toida had 40 loaves of oil, 40 loaves for like a half a lug of oil for each 20 loaves. This is a very small amount of oil. Now, if you mix it in when it's a raw ingredient, okay, a little bit of oil go a long way. Once something is baked and it's hot, it's like a cake, it's absorbent. There's no way that amount of oil could be mixed into the 40 loaves. So that's the Rabbanan say, it must be that it just can't. It'll absorb too much. You pour a little bit of oil in a hot cake, it'll suck it up very quickly. It won't make a roishim. Therefore, it can't be when the Torah says to mix it in by the 40 lachmei toida, it must be raw. So that shows you it's always raw. That's the Rabbanan's shita. So what do you do? And they now reiterate their shita. Nois, exactly. Nois and shemen b'kli kodim lasiyasan. You put some of the oil into the vessel before making it. That's l'kuli alma. V'noisna, and then you put the flour in. Benois and shemen aleu baila, and you mix it in when it's raw. You mix it into the flour. Velasha, you knead it. V'oifa, you bake it. Upaisa, then you break it into pieces. Benois and shemen, then you put the last shemen v'kaimitz. So that's the Rabbanan's thing, that you mix in the oil when it's raw flour. Rabbi Omer, no. Rabbi says, no, you mix it in when it's baked. So how do you do it? Chalas bailan. Shenemar chalas bailas b'shemen. Kate Zarisa, so what's the procedure? Nois and shemen b'kli kaid masi yasan. You put some oil in the vessel before you put in the flour. V'noisa, then you put in the flour. V'loshin, you knead it in dough. You don't add oil now. You knead it into a dough. V'oifa, you bake it. Upaita, you break the dough into pieces. You break the loaf into pieces. V'noisa l'Hashem u'bayla. That's when you mix in the oil. Once it's already broken into pieces. V'choiz v'noisa l'Hashem and v'kaimetz. Then when it's done, you pour more oil on top and you do the kmitza. Now, the Rabbanan Shita that it must be done into the raw ingredients is from the Lachmei Toida. So what's the source from Lachmei Toida? Revius shemenhi. You only have a revius of oil. So that's not enough to mix over 40 loaves of already baked. It doesn't make sense. It's impossible. If it's raw, okay, a little bit of oil into each dough. Fine, shine, a little bit it'll add. But to do it into raw, into baked, it'll completely be absorbed and bottled. It won't make a roshim. Therefore, it must be that it's poured into the raw ingredients. Now, the Mishnah then said, regarding the baked chalas, the minchas mafa, it could either be chalas or rekikin. Chalas, you mix in the oil. Rekikin, you just smear it on top. So it says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, chalas, boilus. Now, what's the source? That again, chalas, you mix. Rekikin, you just smear. It's basically like this. It says chalas, boilus. It says by the chalas, you mix. Implication being, you only mix the oil in the second stage by chalas, but by the rekikin, by wafers, you smear it on top. Because I can make the following argument. I can make the following argument. If the rekikin requires smearing, kavachomer they should require boilin. Meaning, the pasuk basically says, the chalas you mix in, the rekikin you smear. Now, I can make the argument. If the rekikin you smear, kavachayim you should also mix in. The pasuk says no. Chalas boilin, v'loy rekikin. Says the Gemara, tamalem chalas boilin v'loy rekikin. Same thing for the opposite. The source is that the rekikin you smear. So the Gemara says maybe you should make the following kavachayim. If the rekikin you smear kavachayim, you should smear the chalas. The answer is no. Rekikin are smeared and not chalas. Rekikin meshuchin v'loy chalas meshuchas. Shiachav v'loydinu. Umara kikin she'ina tuna belula tuna mashicha, chalas tuna belila in adin tuna mashicha, tamalema rekikin mashicha v'le chalas mashuchais. So that's the source. Now let me ask you a question. You can have this all the time. The pasuk in a couple places says the chalas are mixed and the rekikin are smeared. A couple places. So the Gemara says the Torah is obviously telling you the procedure. Chalas are mixed and not smeared, and rekikin are smeared and not mixed. Okay. The Gemara says, well, maybe you're supposed to do both. Often you have this where the Torah has two concepts and it says A by A and it says B by B and you're supposed to apply them to each other. So how do you know that that's not the case? You say, well, the Torah says chalas are just mixed and not smeared and rekikin are just smeared and not mixed. Well, maybe the Torah is telling you half of each coin, meaning maybe the chalas require both, rekikin require both, and the Torah is just telling you half of the procedure, and you're supposed to apply it. We do that all the time. So it says the Gemara, my Talmuda, how do you know that when the Torah indicates this, it's excluding and not implying that we should actually combine them together? So Gemara says, I'll tell you how I know. The answer is, it's not written once. It's written 3 times. And each time, it says, the chalas are belulas and the rekikin are meshuchas. Each time. The fact that not once does it imply otherwise tells you you're not supposed to apply it together. Meaning, if the Torah meant to actually say that they both should be done for each challah or each rekikin, it wouldn't have said it 3 times, exclusionary lashonos. 3 times, mamish, so many times to say just the challahs are belulois and the meshichin are rekikin are meshuchos, it wouldn't have done this. The Gemara continues, my kimin ki, by the rekikin you smear it like a key. What's a key? Amravkana kimin ki yavani. It's the shape of the Greek key. It's a certain letter in the Greek alphabet. You have to know exactly how it looks like. Tan Rabbanan minchas abba. So we said like this. The chalas, again, when you offer a minchas mafa, they tell you have to bring 10 loaves, and they tell you, would you like to bring chalas or rekikin? Pashtus, you have to choose. If you remember in the Mishnayos, we had a few times that Rav Shimon's shita is that it could actually be split 5 and 5. Now, the chalas you mix the oil in, the rekikas you smear the Greek letter key on top. The question is, if you hold like Rav Shimon, what do you do if you bring both? So the answer is very simple. The 5 that you split the oil, 5 that you bring of chalas you mix, and the 5 that are rekikin you smear. Says the Gemara very simply, Taner Rabbanan, Minchas Abba Mechza Chalas and Mechza Rekikin. Maybe lug Shem v'Chatzei. You take a lug and you divide it. Chatzi l'Chalas, Chatzi Rekikin. Half are meant for the Chalas and half are meant to the Rekikin. Chalas boilin, the Chalas you mix with oil. Rekikin moishchin, and the Rekikin you smear. Now, one quick point though. If I'm smearing Rekikin, right? I'm just doing a quick half moon. Right? Let's assume that that's look like you're going to have extra oil. Right? You're not going to finish all the oil that way. So our Mishnah said the shita of, I think, Rav Shimon is that the excess oil is eaten by the Kehanim. This Brisa brings a different opinion. This Brisa says what you do with the excess oil is here's what you do. You don't do a key. You actually smear the entire wafer, meaning you like an egg wash on top, and then you take the excess oil and you use it on the chalas. So this opinion holds that if you have half chalas, half rekikin, you take the rekikin, you don't do a letter, Greek letter. You actually smear it on top fully, and then you take the excess oil, you don't give it to the Kehanim, unlike our Mishnah, this Brisa holds, you take the excess oil and use it on the chalas, and mix it more into the chalas. So the chalas are more oily. Now, Rav Shimon ben Yehuda disagrees. He says, B'Shem Rav Shimon, he heard from Rav Shimon, this is Moishchan Kamiki, V'shar Hashem and Echel Kehanim. No, you do the Greek letter, and the rest are eaten by the Kehanim, which is the opinion of our Mishnah. The Gemara offers a second shita. The Gemara says the second shita. Tani Idach, the Brisa says, Rekikin Abon B'fnei Atzmai. If Rekikin are brought by themselves, so again, what do? So we said in our Mishnah, you do a Greek letter, and the excess are given to the Kehanim to eat. So says the Gemara, maybe lug shemen, moishchan v'choyzer v'moishchan ashiyichshe kol shemen shebelug. This Tanakama disagrees. He says, what you do. You smear it on top. Right, you do smear it on top, and you have a lot of oil, so smear it again, and again, miracle, again, until the entire oil is absorbed. Meaning, you smear it until as many layers until you use all the oil. That's the shita. Rishim ben Yehuda, Mishum Shimon says, like we had before, Moishchan Kanki v'Shar Hashem and Nechel Kehanim. Very good. Okay.
Why would you do a rekikin?
What do you mean?
Versus the chalas?
Dealer's choice. If you're donating, you get to choose. I don't know. I'm assuming it's like picking an esrog, whatever speaks to you. If you're feeling in a rekikin mood or a chalas mood, I'm not sure. Now, one of the interesting things about most of the Menachos, it's just interesting because it's like we don't know a lot about kmitza, but like when we think of kmitza, we don't think of like the majority of kmitza. The majority of kmitza is not done on flour; it's done on already baked bread. We think of flour because the sinner's mincha is like that, but in the majority of minchas, the oil, flour, oil, bake it, they break it apart. It's called petita. Petita means you break it apart, and then you take the broken piece and you burn that. Now, by the way, if there's a little bit protruding out, then you break off the broken piece, but you're basically taking like a large piece of cake, so to speak. Now, no, so there is one shita. It's funny. You probably know this because brachas. The Gemara in brachas quotes a shita that holds that you actually have to break the cake or the baked bread into actual flour again. But that's not the universal shita. We'll get to that in a second. Pashas, you just have to break it up into a few pieces. You break it up into pieces. Now, most minchas require petisa. So says the Mishnah, Kol ha-benachas hanasis b'kli. Any mincha that's mekudish in a kli shares tu'unim petisa. It requires petisa. Okay. Lemute mai. Now, which mincha does not require petisa? Amrav Papa lemute shtei halechem v'lechem hapanim. The shtei halechem and lechem hapanim are never broken apart. They're eaten whole. Whatever, you cut them in the slices with a knife. There's no doing the petisa process by the lechem hapanim, the showbread, and the shtei halechem of Shavuos. Tan Rabbanon, we have to have a source for this. Potois oisa petisim. Pitim mincha. L'rabbis kol minchas l'petisa. All minchas have to go through this petisa process. So they're baked and then they're broken apart. Maybe the shtei halechem and lechem hapanim also require petisa. Tamalomar osa. Osa implies that only some require and not others. Not the shtei halechem and lechem hapanim. They don't need to be broken apart. And by the way, the procedure. My throat. The procedure for breaking apart the petisa, we'll see in the next Mishnah of how it actually practically looked like. By the way, it was not like, just taking a loaf and just shredding it. There was a special way that was folded once and folded a fourth time, and then on the seams like a piece of paper, they would break it apart on the seams. This is a special way to do it. Says the Gemara, the pasuk then says regarding the third application of oil that you have to pour oil at the end. All minchas require yitzika. You might think that you should include minchas mafa, the baked mincha, that it also requires yitzika. If you remember from the previous Mishnah, I told you the one mincha that does not require yitzika, the last application of oil, which is poured on top, is the minchas mafa. The chalas or kika do not require the third application. So Aleh Hashemen means that you don't put the third application of oil. Now I told you the minchas mafa has two parts. It's got chalas and rekikin. So I got one exclusion that's for the chalas. How do I know that if I'm bringing rekikin, I also don't put the third application of oil? He. So Aleh Hashemen and he, two miyutim, one for chalas, one for rekikin. Now let me ask you a question. It nowhere says in the pasuk, it's basically telling you there are certain minchas that don't require the third application of oil. Now we're assuming it's minchas mafa. It doesn't say this anywhere. It just says some don't have it. Aleha means some don't have it. He means some don't have it. We're assuming it's the minchas mafa. How do you know it's not minchas kayin? I don't know. The answer is, I'll just say it outside. There are two exclusions. What's the one carbon that you got two options? And that's the minchas mafa. The minchas mafa is the only mincha where you walk in and they say, which one do you want? Chalas or rekikin? So because there's two of them, if there's two exclusions within one carbon, the only carbon that has two applications is the minchas mafa. Says the Gemara, my Talmuda, go to the next page. What's the one carbon mincha that has two applications that you need two exclusionary terms? Okay. This is a donut, just in the mood. Vibing. Minchas mafa today. Yeah. Now, the Mishnah now talks about the application of petitza. Most carbon minchas, outside of shtei lechem, lechem apanim, you have to do petitza. What did the petitza look like? So it wasn't just shredding it into pieces. Again, it's baked. You have not done the kmitza yet, so you have to break it apart, do the petitza. Now, two things we have to figure out. What did the petitza look like? And also, what about a mincha that I don't do a kmitza? I'll give you an example. An optional minchas kayin, they don't do a kmitza. Outside of you just burn the whole thing. But you still have to do petitza. But I'm breaking it apart for what purpose? Like, if you tell me that the purpose of breaking it apart is to do the kmitza, because it's a whole loaf, you can't do a kmitza on a whole loaf, I get it. But there are certain minchas that you're not doing kmitza anyway. And yet you still have to do petitza. So what did that look like? So says the Mishnah, Minchas Yisrael. Regarding a Minchas Yisrael, which has a kmitza, here's how the petitza looked like. You take the loaf, think of the loaf as think of it as like a lafa. Okay, let's assume it looked like a lafa. I don't know if it did, but just visually. Okay, because again, it wasn't chametz, so it's not gonna be a large, like we think of like a mincha as like a big loaf. It's not gonna be a loaf. It's not chametz. It's gonna be like a svay de shematza. Here's what you do. The petitza looked as follows: koifel achel shnayim. You fold it once, vishnayim la'arba. Then you fold it into quarters. So you fold it once, and then you fold it a second time, and now it's in quarters. Umavdil. You separate on the perforation, and now you have 4 equal pieces. That is the petitza process. You take one of those pieces, and that's the kmitza. Obviously, if there's a little bit excess, you might have to break off a little bit, but that's basically what it's going to look like. Now, minchas kehanim, you also had to do petitza, but there was no kmitza. So what's the point of breaking it apart? The answer is, you still have the Torah says to do it. Here's what you do. You fold it, but you don't rip it apart. Merely folding it is yaitza petitza. So what you do by the minchas kayin is you fold, and then burn it. So you don't rip it apart. There's no need to rip it apart. Ripping apart is for the kmitza. The folding is yaitza the petitza. So you yaitza the petitza by folding it, but by the Yisrael, you have to rip it on the perforation now in order so that you can have a kmitza and the rest are eaten. By minchas kehanim, which is entirely burnt, you fold and then burn the whole thing. The Mishnah, minchas kehanim, koifel echel l'shnayim v'shnayim la'arba v'einam avdil. You don't separate the 4 quarters, you just fold it and then burn it as a folded, like tortilla. Minchas kayin Mashiach lahem mekafla. And the daily mincha of the kayin gadol, the chavitin, wasn't folded at all. That was just merely burnt whole, as a whole, placed it on it. Now that's assuming that you have to fold the minchas kayin. You fold, but you don't separate. Zakrav Shimon or Shimon Aimer, Shimon says, Minchas Kehanim, Minchas Kohen Mashiach, Ein Behen Petisa. The Minchas Kehanim, which don't have Kemitza, don't have Petisa either. He believes the whole inyan of Petisa is to allow there to be Kemitza. If there is no Kemitza, there's no Petisa. That's Rosh Shita. Because Rosh is Darish time of the cross, and he says, why do you think there's a Petisa by Minchas? It's not just because the Torah is interested in folding stuff. It's because that will allow the Kemitza to be done. No Kemitza, no Petisa. That's my new slogan. So says the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, and all the petisas, by the way, you have to make sure that each piece is a kazayis. Meaning you can't fold it, it has to be folded evenly, so that each piece is a kazayis. Okay. Zakti Gemara Tanarabanan Potois. I told you with the petisin, you fold it into quarters. Fold it once, and then fold it again, and then separate. How do you know you fold it into quarters? So Potois is plural is two, Yochel Shnaim. Tamler Potois Oisa Petisim. Twice. So 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, Yochel Yasa Perurin, you might think that you don't fold it 4 times. Maybe you're supposed to shred it mamish like a challah souffle, like mamish they shred into little pieces. Tamlama Osa. Osa implies that it's still whole, it's still big. Osa leptisim, v'loy petisim leptisim. You fold the loaf into pieces and not the pieces into pieces. So 4 pieces is zeu. By the way, according to this Bryce, the Minchas Chavitin you would actually fold. The Mishnah disagreed. Oh, the Gemara says the Minchas Koyin you would fold, but not rip. Then the Mishnah said that the Chavitin of the Koyin Gadol was not folded at all. It was whole. This Bryce says fold. So how do you reconcile that? Says the Gemara. The answer is it's like a sort of middle ground. The average mincha you would fold into quarters. The mincha of the chavitin, the kohen gadol, you would fold into half. Okay, so therefore it's not folded, but it's not folded. It's folded into half. Okay. Now this until the end of the daf. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. This is a sugya in brachis and ketzad mevarchin. It's come out the exact same lashon from the Mishnah ketzad mevarchin. The problem is that it's a big shaila how to learn the sugya. I'm going to try to learn it. I'm going to learn it the way Rashi learns it because that's how we paskin. It's negay for the laws of brachas. So, Amr of Yosef, Hai Chavitza. Chavitza, which Rashi says is a piece of, it's a challah kugel, a challah souffle. So you're taking bread and you're boiling it in like a milky liquid. Okay, that's how you make a challah souffle. You take pieces of bread, you pour enough liquid that it's covered, and we call it baked, but it's cooked in a liquid, so it's boiled because it's boiled. So the question is, what bracha do you make on it? So when you bake bread, it's bread, it's hamaitzi. If you then boil the pieces, says the Gemara, if the pieces are a kazayis, you have to make hamaitzi. Less than perun kazayis, but if the pieces are not a kazayis, then mevarchlan bar min mezayis, which is, by the way, how we paskin. That if you take a piece of bread and you boil it, it depends. What's the size of the bread? If it's a kazayis, it remains hamaitzi. If it's less than a kazayis, then it's mezayis. That's how we paskin. So I told you years ago I was in Pita Hut, and they had pieces of pita that they would cut up, and then they deep fried it and they put it by the washing station. So I just went over. I was like, "This is mezainis." Deep fried is cooked. It's cooking, and you deep fry a piece of bread, a sliver of bread. It's mezainis. Anyway, Rav Yosef says, how do I know that there's a chilik between kazayis or not? Again, the reason why this is so tricky is because you were just talking about boiling bread. Comes Rav Yosef, what's my source that kazayis is significant? So says Rav Yosef to Tanya, you're bringing a mincha in Yerushalayim. You make a bracha shechianu, right? First time the mitzvah, you make a shechianu. You have to understand exactly why. Yeah. The reason being is because if you're in a mishmar, you haven't brought a mincha in half a year, so you make a shechianu. Good. Then natlan la'achila, if you're taking a piece of bread to eat, mivarach hamaitzi lechem min haaretz. Now let me ask you a question. How big were these pieces? So the Mishnah said that when they would rip it apart, they had to ensure it was still a kazayas. So you see, a kazayas is the shear for hamaitzi. Says the Gemara, it's not kulam paitin kazayas. Now what's the pella? Now the reason why it's a pella is because you're trying to bring a discussion about bread that was then boiled. Our Mishnah is not talking about bread that was boiled. They're talking about just cutting up a piece of bread. Taisus has his arichos. Taisus says, because some menachos were fried afterwards, maybe, it's a pella. Okay, but you see from the Mishnah that it has to be a kazayis. Says the Gemara Kasha, Amarle Abayu, Tana the Rabbi Shmuel. Now, wait a minute. So your whole raya that kazayis is significant is because you make a hamaitzi on the mincha by kazayis, even though it wasn't boiled afterwards. Says the Gemara, well, that's because our shita holds that it was broken up into kazayis pieces. The problem is, Tana the Rabbi Shmuel holds, he actually holds that you take the baked bread, or the fried bread, and you break it into pieces till it's a flour, a fine flour. So according to him, you wouldn't make hamaitzi. You tell me it's kazayis or nothing. Says the Gemara, how could that be? And if you say, yeah, according to him, maybe you don't make hamaitzi, it's not true. If you gather all the crumbs together of the mincha and you eat a kazayis, im chametzu anish karis, im matzahu on yoyzi lichavas bepesach. It could be on Pesach. It's obviously hamaitzi. So what's the answer, by the way? So why is that? Because it's not boiled afterwards. It's not then boiled. It's a piece of bread. You could break bread apart. By the way, it would seem from this Gemara at this point that if I were to take a piece of bread and shred it up into pieces, I maybe shouldn't make hamaitzi, which is obviously not how we pass it. So today's daf is a little bit tricky. I'll leave it with the hilsa. Leave the hilsa, you have to put on the side. Says the Gemara, so what's the pshat over here? So if you're telling me that it has to be a kazayis, then how are you making a hamaitzi if it's on little pieces? So Amra, Hachamay, Skina, the Gemara responds, B'she'irsan. We're talking about a case now where you took a little piece of bread and ate it. You dafka took a whole piece of bread, remade it into a kazayis, and rebaked it. Meaning, maybe you only have a hamaitzi if you rebake a kazayis worth. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, wait a minute. It says if you ate them, the little pieces in Kedei Pras, but according to you, it's not little pieces anymore. You took the shredded pieces of bread and reformed it into a kazayis. It should be that you ate it as a kazayis. So what's going on? The diktuk is not good. The answer is, the reason why you make hamaitzi is because it was formed from a large loaf. Meaning, according to this opinion, whether you make hamaitzi or not depends. If there was a large loaf that you ripped it apart and the large loaf is still there, then you make hamaitzi. If the large loaf is completely shredded to the point where it's gone, then it's a mezainis. How do we paskin? My haviala, Risheshes Amar Afilu Perun Sheime Kazayis. We paskin that if you take bread and you shred it, even if the pieces are not a kazayis, you make a hamotzi. Amarava v'huteika terisa denamaleha. As long as it has the tzuras hapas, meaning as long as it was not subsequently boiled. Tzuras hapas means as long as it was baked. But if it was subsequently boiled, it loses the characteristic of bread, and then it becomes a mezainis. I will stop here. So I'm sending.